Welcome to the Healthy Home Show. I'm your host, Fernanda Furman, Healthy Home Architect.
Hi, I'm Eric Furman, Healthy Home Contractor.
And today we're here with Dr. Felice Gersh, and we're so excited to talk to you today. And thank you so much for being part of this project, Dr. Felice.
Oh, it's really an honor, and we've just been chatting, and I'm so thrilled with all you're doing. And like I said, I'm totally aligned with your mission, and we just are here to educate and help people to lead better, optimized lives.
Perfect. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and thank you so much. So, quick bio on Dr. Felice Gersh. She's a board-certified OBGYN and an integrative medicine. She taught as an assistant clinical professor at the Keck in USC, the School of Medicine, for 12 years, and she is the founder and director of the Integrative Medical Group of Irvine. She's a globally recognized expert on women's health, which is going to be a great topic today. She regularly speaks at conferences around the world. Dr. Gersh is a best-selling author of PCOS, SOS. For those of us that don't know, like me, that's polycystic ovary syndrome. She specializes in all aspects of gynecological health and the effects of environmental toxins on female health. So welcome to the show. We are very excited to have you here today.
Well, I'm here to try to educate women about what's going on in their bodies so that they can actually deal with it, because there's a lot going on, I can tell you that.
Yes.
Yeah, so going back to the beginning, what actually triggered you to start going towards integrative medicine, and what are the things that you have seen in your practice that most likely are being caused by environmental toxins?
Well, I ended up going down the path into integrative medicine more in a focused way, because actually early on in my career and my practice, I did incorporate what I called my ancillaries. I had, from the very beginning, I had a Chinese medicine practitioner, a nutritionist, a psychologist, a massage therapist, biofeedback. So I had a lot of people sort of expanding what I called my therapeutic toolbox. But I myself had no additional special training. But I decided 12 years ago that it was time to give up obstetrics. After delivering thousands of babies, it was just my time to move on. And maybe I had more sleep, I had more time, but I started looking at what I had to offer to my patients and what was going on and the types of changes I was seeing in my patient population. And I felt really lost. It's like, what am I offering them? I'm really an expert surgeon, but I'm dealing with end-stage disease. Every time I take someone and put them on the operating table, I'm cutting them open, I'm removing parts of organs or parts of their body, and I wanted to be like more proactive, and I didn't really have the tools. So I went on sort of my own personal journey. I started taking courses all over the country. I started working with chiropractors, naturopaths, all types of nutritionists, different kinds of practitioners that I actually had never dealt with before, to try to learn what they had in their toolbox to help patients. I ended up at one conference one time, and I was the only doctor in the audience that wasn't a naturopath, and the speaker was an MD as well. So I went up to her during a break and I said, Dr. Lodog, you and I are the only MDs in this room of naturopaths, and I'm so lost. I don't really have a clear path because I really want to have more to offer my patients. And she said, well, our fellowship starts in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona School of Medicine in just 2 weeks. Why don't you apply? And I think this would be great. So I went home. I was in Portland. I flew home that night. I filled out the application. And 2 weeks later, I was in Tucson, Arizona. I did this fellowship for 2 years. I completed it in 2012, and I've never looked back. I've only expanded my therapeutic toolbox. And in the process, I really started looking at the evolution of my patient population in terms of the medical ills that they were now experiencing. And I saw the women suffering from obesity was dramatically on the rise, infertility, period problems. Oh my gosh, young girls would go through puberty and immediately they were being put on birth control pills by other practitioners because their periods were painful, irregular, heavy, and the doctors had no clue what to do. They didn't even realize that this was like the body crying out for help, like this is a young girl that really needs to be looked at, but they would immediately put them on birth control pills. And my menopausal women, when they lost their estrogen from their ovaries as they transitioned into the menopause, they were suffering so greatly. I'd never seen so many women with such terrible hot flashes and mood disorders. And it seemed like everyone had osteoporosis right off the bat when we would get a bone density. So I just was so glad that I had done this fellowship. And in the process, I decided to learn more about environmental medicine because clearly things were changing. So I did the program with Dr. Walter Crinian, and his program started many, many years ago, and I ended up becoming one of his sort of educators. I spoke at his educational environmental healthcare symposium multiple times, and the whole world of environmental medicine became fully integrated into my practice. So now everyone gets an intake of what kind of exposures they've had. And then I look at, environmental toxins from the biotoxic side to the chemical toxic side, electromagnetic, to really try to put the puzzle together for what's underlying all of these symptoms so that we could come up with real solutions.
So, what would you say are the sources of these environmental toxins within a home? Because this is where one of the things that have changed. People are spending more time indoors. We've become, quote unquote, the indoor generation. So like in a home, in an office, in a car, we're always in something generally. Where are these toxins coming from? What are some of the biggest offenders that you're seeing?
Oh, there's unfortunately so many. If you look at like the kitchen, okay, so in the kitchen, a lot of people are using still plastic containers for storage. So they're taking hot food right out of the oven or from the stovetop after they've served themselves on their plates, and they're putting it right into plastic. And a lot of this incorporates, when it's the firm plastic, it's the BPA, which, oh my gosh, that has become just like one of the most evil things in women's health is BPA and how it affects women, the most research being involving polycystic ovary syndrome, which I wrote the book on, because it's now heavily linked to exposures at many stages of life, including in utero, to bisphenol A, BPA. So in the kitchen, there's a lot of exposures there. Then there's a lot of soft plastics everywhere throughout the home. In terms of the bathroom, if you look at the containers with all of the shampoos and the conditioners, and of course, many of them contain, and the bottles they're in are all full of phthalates. These are clear-cut endocrine disruptors. And then in the bathrooms, the shower vinyl curtains, which are off-gassing, also the phthalates. So you have the vinyl shower curtains, and then you have the phthalates in the shampoos and the conditioners and the soaps, the body washes, and as well, the cabinetry. People don't think about their cabinets, that they're off-gassing often formaldehyde and other solvents, the glues and so on. And the carpets as well, there's often tacked down, and they have as well solvents involved in the prevention of getting stains. So they have stain retardants and stick retardants and things. So all of these chemicals that are implanted, I used to call them like stain guard and things like that. They are all full of chemical endocrine disruptors. And then some people use air fresheners, which are really also phthalates, which are really toxic endocrine disruptors. And then, of course, the cleaning solutions that people often use in their homes are often full of many, many toxic chemicals, bleaches, and terrible solvents as well, solvents everywhere, and they off-gas. So there's styrene, and a lot of people that use like the styrofoam cups and the serving containers that people take out of restaurants when they take out food are often lined with things that are really like stick resistant things that are really toxic chemicals. And many of these are what they call persistent organic chemicals. So the body has a real difficulty detoxifying and eliminating these chemicals. And then the styrofoam glasses and cups for coffee and such that sometimes people have in their homes, leftovers from parties and things. And they're all putting out styrene. So you have, and then some people do things like home furniture refinishing. So they have all kinds of like turpentine and xylene and all these different types of also solvents. So there's like a world of solvents, in terms of cleaning solutions and do it your home, people who are doing woodworking and home fixing and refinishing. And then there are people who have hobbies at home. I've seen so many of my patients are creative, but unfortunately they're using things like acrylic paints and oil paints that off-gas as well. And these are also very toxic solvents. And so these volatile organic particles and so on, these are the VOCs. These are really toxic. And then, of course, in the home, many of them are built kind of shabbily, unfortunately, with the plumbing. And then, of course, there's just natural disasters with floods and rains. And some people live near a body of water. In Southern California, we have the Pacific Ocean just down the street. And some people live right on the Pacific Ocean and they get a lot of moisture coming off and they have mold. And people don't realize that mold has many toxic effects, including creating its own VOCs, its own mycotoxins, which can off-gas these chemical toxins that are really just like solvents, and they can also be very harmful. So it sounds so gruesome when we talk about it like this, because, we love our home, it's our sanctuary, and then, it's like we don't want to create post-traumatic home disorder so that nobody wants to go in their front door. But we have to be aware, right? Without awareness. So I say this all the time. If you don't define and understand the problem, you'll never come up with a solution, but you're certainly not going to resolve it and you're not going to get better. So we have to first understand all of this stuff and then design ways to actually confront it and deal with it.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, I feel like I got a degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. And you're saying something that's so important, like we should not look at this as something that would stop us from moving forward, but as a way of, okay, if I find the problem, I can find a solution, which is huge because a lot of us, we don't understand what the problem is and where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. And there are so many small things that we can do daily. And the ones that you mentioned, for example, starting in the kitchen, right? For us is a kitchen and bedroom, or like the places that we spend more time in. And you mentioned also the PVC on the shower curtains. And one of the places that it's just like, once you understand what the chemicals are, what they're doing to your body, then you understand, you are able to see where they are actually everywhere else in the house. So when you buy those mattress cover for the kids because they pee on, in the bed, what they're made out of. And the kids are like facing that little, they're in the crib a lot of the time and they're facing with the face there and they breathe faster than us. So they're breathing all those chemicals.
Right. I'm glad that you brought up the bed because I didn't mention the bed, because talk about mattresses. You mentioned the cover, which can be a very big deal, but many people are sleeping on mattresses that are foam. And foam is petroleum product derived. And these off-gas styrene and benzene, and your face is in it. So you're breathing in these fumes that are really petroleum products. So I urge people, I know people love some of these foam mattresses. I'll leave out the brand names, but but people know them. And then if they don't have a foam mattress, often they get a foam topper. They get these foam pillows that they love. They're all like shaped and so on. But the reality is that those are off-gassing really toxic fumes. So, I know it's expensive to get an organic mattress, but if possible, that would be ideal. There's organic latex and there's wool. There's many different, so you're not allergic to something. There's always something out there. And if you just can't get an organic one, at least don't get a foam one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, the whole goal with this is tying all of us together. So in your practice now, in our case too, we don't really seek a solution or help until we got sick. So mostly women, I'm assuming are all women that are coming into your facility. What are they seeing from the environmental toxins? Like, what are their symptoms? What's happening to them? And then how are you giving them solutions to bring back home or to implement? Obviously removing a lot of this stuff, right?
As much as I can. So I'll start with the most common endocrine disorder of women, which is PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. This used to be maybe at most 5%. of the female population. Now, depending on who you ask, because there's no real data keeping, but it could be as high as 25%. It's amazingly common. It's the most common cause of female infertility, and it's linked to a whole host of metabolic disorders, like significantly increased risk of developing diabetes and hypertension, serious pregnancy-related complications. And then because they have elevated levels of androgens, like testosterone, they have just terrible things they have to deal with, like facial hair growing and having to deal with that loss of their scalp hair, alopecia, and sometimes recalcitrant, just terribly resistant to treatment, cystic acne in the jawline and so forth. So they have 80% have very stubborn obesity, very, very difficult to lose weight, even if they try to starve themselves. And they have appetite dysregulations, mood disorders, irritable bowel syndromes, increased risk for arthritis, autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto. So, I mean, this is a very serious, overwhelming in terms of it involves all organ systems. And that's why it tends to be ignored by doctors, because it's like too complex. If it's not simple, they don't want to deal with it. And they get punted from specialist to specialist, and the treatments haven't really changed much in the conventional medical world. And now we know from wonderful research that's been done that there's a very fundamental defect in the receptor function of their estradiol receptors. Their estrogen receptors are essentially not working properly. They're resistant. So most people know that diabetes has insulin resistance. So that's where the receptor for insulin just isn't working right. And so the insulin is trying to get into the receptor, and then the blood sugar would go down because the sugar would be transported into the cell. That's how, but it doesn't work, so that's resistance of the insulin receptor. Well, that can happen with any hormonal receptor. And in women with PCOS, it's happening for sure with the estrogen receptors, that the estrogen that they have just isn't doing the job because it can't get into the receptor. So it doesn't matter what you have if it doesn't get into the door, essentially. Mm-hmm. So, and in addition, to make it even more sort of unfortunate, it turns out that women with PCOS don't make enough estrogen. They don't make it properly either, due to defects involving the ovarian function with the enzyme that converts testosterone into estradiol, the estrogen form from the ovary. That enzyme isn't working properly. So you end up with too much testosterone because it's like an assembly line and it gets blocked here and doesn't turn into estrogen. So you get too much testosterone, and that's a big problem. And you have this resistance to estrogen. Well, now we know that estrogen is a key player across the body. It's not just about fertility, which it is, but it's also about making the arteries work properly, the gut work properly, the brain, the joints, the bone. It's basically the hormonal glue between reproductive function and everything else, all of the metabolic functions that keep our body humming, because the nature didn't evolve a woman so that these two areas of her life, metabolic function and reproductive function, are completely separate. They're all linked, okay? And it's estrogen. So you add in an endocrine disruptor, and most research, and I'm sure it involves many more, but most research has focused on bisphenol A, which is found, it's like ubiquitous. It's in so many things, which we can touch on, and it ends up in just about, I think, 90+% of people, when they test them, they have this in their bodies. It's really hard to escape it, but we have to try to reduce it as much as we can, and then increase our body's ability to eliminate it. So it turns out that women with PCOS have a genetic propensity to having some difficulties with conversion of testosterone to estrogen, but everything is magnified because of the impact of this endocrine disruptor, BPA, and probably others. So they basically live in a body that's estrogen deficient. So if you think about estrogen as regulating the production and storage of energy, how the brain works, the vascular, the heart, then you can see why it's a total body metabolic dysfunction. So I think of PCOS as the poster child of how endocrine disruptors can disrupt the female body and the linkage between reproductive health and metabolic health. And everyone, even women who don't have PCOS, have some degree of this. So even though they may not be to the extreme because they don't have the underlying genetic issues that sort of predispose them to this, they're still going to have some degree of this happening in them. So there's some women that may have just irregular cycles, or they may have mood disorders, or they may have weight resistance issues that they can't lose weight. And this could all be coming into play, that maybe it's in part because of their exposures to endocrine disruptors like BPA. So BPA is found in the liners of cans, and almost everyone has some canned goods. Now, you can buy some canned goods. You have to get it from specialty shops that have, they say, no BPA, but you then have to make sure that they haven't replaced it with BPS or BPF or some. This happens all the time. They say, well, we're getting rid of that, and then they change it in some very minimal way and can actually even make it worse. So, if possible, I say try to avoid cans altogether. And then in some cases, and some places say they've taken it out, but it has traditionally been part of the dental sealants that they put on kids' teeth to try to prevent cavities. And it's plastic. When people have like different kinds of types of braces that are made out of plastics and so on that they're putting in the mouth. And then cash register receipts that you get wherever you go, those cash register receipts are filled with BPA. And then plastics. So all the plastics are made from BPA. And what's interesting in the history of BPA is that its first appearance in the world was trying to be a pharmaceutical. It actually was presented that BPA would be a pharmaceutical to be used in women as as an estrogen replacement. And instead, it lost out to diethylstilbestrol, also known as DES, because DES was a more powerful endocrine estrogen receptor disruptor than BPA was. So BPA lost out at becoming a pharmaceutical and ended up in all these other products. So it's kind of weird when you think that. It also makes you think twice about pharmaceuticals, because that pharmaceutical might have ended up being a plastic jar. It's like it just ended up being a pharmaceutical. And you have to be aware of this history. It's so fascinating. So women with PCOS now are so prevalent in our society, and so that became one of my missions, to try to come up with practical solutions to help them.
Wow, there's a lot of things that I didn't even know. And we have been trying to clean our life as much as possible. And when you think you know a lot, you learn that you don't know as much. And that's why I believe in the power of community, because we're always learning from each other, right? Absolutely. But you have been mentioning a lot of women. Do you see those the same kind of effect in the men's health? Because I know you also address men's health. How do you see those toxins affecting men?
Oh, men, of course, are affected as well. They have different bodies, so things will manifest in different ways. A lot of the research on men has been involving the endocrine disruptors called phthalates. These are also known as plasticizers. So they make up everything that you see when you get any kind of a product and it says fragrance. Fragrance is a phthalate. Unless it says like organic lavender petals or something, I can tell you it's a phthalate. And these are serious endocrine disruptors. So when you see soft plastic, and this is rampant. I'm a doctor. I spent years working in hospitals. Unfortunately, this is a fact. When you have soft tubing, like IV tubing, and the soft containers of IV fluids, and even blood transfusions, these are the plastic containers. They're all phthalates, and their contents are, when they go into the body, it does absorb into the body. There was one study, and this is like life-threatening. You have to do what you have to do. But they looked at blood, which used to be like blood transfusions. They used to look at it. They used to keep them in glass jars, but now they don't. They put them all in these soft plastic containers that you may have seen them on television, right? Like these soft plastic containers. And they found that when blood sits in those containers, long, right up into the point where they would be called expired. It's like, this is too old. Now you have to get rid of it. That it absorbs a humongous amount of the phthalates of the container that it's sitting in. So when somebody gets a transfusion, they don't know it's a transfusion of blood that can be life-saving, but they're also getting a transfusion of phthalates. So these are like really, shocking things that we have to really come to grips with, that our medical institutions are using phthalates like crazy. They're also in the home, like we talked about, in fragrances, which are everywhere, including, these really expensive colognes, and men use them too. So men take their morning phthalate dose. It's like, here's my manly scent. It's like, uh-oh, they just wiped phthalate all over their face. And then they probably washed, did their beautiful hair in some phthalate containing shampoo. And these things are lowering men's sperm counts and their testosterone levels. We're finding amazingly low testosterone levels in young men. Like, if you know testosterone, so you want to have a lot when you're a man, right? So you want to have levels like 800, 900. You don't want to have like 200. And I'm finding 23-year-old guys, and they come to me. I don't see a lot of men, but because I'm double board certified, I can see men too. It's sometimes like their mom refers them in, because they say, my 23-year-old son is so upset. He's like emotional. He doesn't seem to have like determination. He can't make a decision, and he goes to the gym and he can't build any muscle, and he's all flabby. And then I check this 23-year-old guy's testosterone level, and it's like 180. It's like, like these are huge problems that they're finding. And then if they have a sperm count tested, it can be very subfertile in terms of its numbers. So fertility problems are skyrocketing, and people don't realize this, that when you have an infertile couple, it's generally believed that 40% is female related and 40% is male related. And then 20% is both. So males are equally, in the hot seat for having infertility problems as are women, but they're often ignored because women are just more vocal and more obvious, because if a woman doesn't have normal periods, that's becomes very obvious to her. And men, they just sort of, slug along, they can't build muscle, they don't feel right, they often have like no sex drive. And men, very young men, are having sexual dysfunction, ED, and they're like 25. It's like, it's very, very shocking. And these are endocrine disruptor related issues. So moms have to be thinking about these things when they take, like you said, putting the baby on the water resistant thing so that they don't pee into the mattress. Well, that little baby boy, if they're getting all these, phthalates because it's some sort of vinyl product, that's really a terrible thing. And this is happening because moms don't know. They just buy things, they sell it. And I know this is a true story. My dad really believed that the government kept us safe, that they were there to protect us. When they developed the FDA, they're going to protect us. So he actually had a slogan, and now it's sort of laughable, but it was, they wouldn't let them sell it if it wasn't safe. Like they wouldn't let them do that if it wasn't safe. It's like, so like I grew up and it's like, they sell it, we'll buy it. There was no thought that maybe this is harmful. Never even crossed their minds, my parents, like, so, new plastic containers, these wonderful things that we can store all our hot food in. And, it's just really, it's just sad that, because it should be that if they sell it, it must be safe, and it isn't. So we all need to be on high alert, because men, women, we're all suffering. And when you see fertility problems, that is such a sign of dysfunction. Fertility is a vital sign of health for a person in the reproductive years. If a person who's in the reproductive years, teens, 20s, 30s, if they are all messed up, they have no fertility, then clearly there's something hugely underlying involving their health. And we need to look at this. That's why I repeat over and over that when a woman has menstrual dysfunction, it is not a call to action to put her on birth control pills. Another, by the way, endocrine disruptor, which is a very, terrible thing that we can't seem to deal with contraception without putting poisons into women. But they're slow poisons, but they're poisons, just like BPA is a slow poison and almost was a pharmaceutical. We could have BPA in birth control pills. I'm not kidding. That could have been it. Instead of ethinyl estradiol, it could have been BPA. So the reality is that this is a huge problem that we need to recognize, that everyone should have vital hormones, and young women should have wonderful rhythms and hormones every single minute of their lives. And it's so sad we have to go through menopause, but we should at least enjoy all our beautiful hormones during the years that we should have them, and that isn't happening. And because of chemical endocrine disruptors, and then both intentional like birth control pills, and unintentional, which come into our lives. And then men, their fertility is plummeting. And there have been all these doomsday movies about no one can reproduce anymore. I have nightmares about that, because I see these fertility problems coming at such young ages. So that's why what you're doing is just so near and dear to my heart, because you're educating families to be aware that these things do matter, and that you cannot say, like my dad did, that, oh, they couldn't sell it if it wasn't safe, because they
do that so much.
Yeah, and you even see it in solutions that are trying to be quote unquote green or healthy. There's this another term, green washing. Yeah, so then even in an effort to buy something else that you think is okay, may have, like you mentioned, BPA, there may be other plasticizers or other plastic elements to that, or let's say you leave it in the sun or cook with it or expose it to high heat. There's all these other things. You really need to think out and outside the box and all the way through on this stuff. In your personal experience and what you're seeing, because we're going through that right now as part of our transition of exposing ourselves, and there's so many elements to it and you'll never stop. What are you seeing as viable solutions? We started exploring like stainless steel with a silicone top. There's so many other things like Pyrex, but then you still have a plastic top on that.
Now we're trying to make our own products and store in glass. So whenever we buy glass jars, I'm not throwing them away anymore. I'm just repurposing them for different things.
It's funny, we're doing exactly the same thing. We got rid of all of our plastic storage quite some time ago. So we have only stainless steel, ceramic, and glass. And we use a lot of the silicone tops. We have them, they come in like different sizes. You've probably seen them, but they sort of stack. And then you just, it's like good enough. The idea is don't let your food sit in your refrigerator too long. Don't, eat it up pretty soon. I've even used a plate, that's like a ceramic plate, and just put it over another plate. It's like I'm sandwiching something in between two plates. We're becoming more creative. It's really difficult when you want to take something out of the house. So it's like you can't take two plates that are like that. So I think all of us cheat here and there, and like we'll have a glass and, like you said, and a plastic top. But even when I do that, because I need a seal, I just can't put just a plate on top or something. I need a seal because I'm going to possibly have food all over my car, or trunk. So then I will use something like a plastic top, but I make sure nothing is filled to the top so that the food doesn't at least touch it. And so it's all cold, so there's nothing hot in there that's going to melt it, and that type of thing. And many of the medical conferences that I go to now that are run by the more functional medicine, integrative, when they have coffee breaks, they do not have those plastic cups with the plastic lids anymore. But then it's funny because people say, but where are they? I need them. I'm going to spill this mug. It's like, oh, just fill it less. People have gotten so spoiled with these convenience items that are also toxic. We just have to get back to basics, and stop, so it doesn't fit perfectly. So it's not a perfect seal when you put it in your refrigerator. It's like, it's okay, just eat it tomorrow. Don't make it to last for the week. You just can't do that anymore. When I was a kid, it was actually before they invented plastic baggies, plastic bag. I actually saw the first plastic bag come on the market, and it was, it didn't have a Ziploc seal. At that time, it didn't exist. It sort of had a fold, sort of like a little fold thing in it. And it was like the greatest thing. So of course my mom bought it right away to put all our food in the plastic bags. And, but now it's like really hard. Like, what are you going to take? But before the plastic bags came out, we had what was called wax paper. And it was just plain, simple wax. And it didn't have, it was made from like beeswax, so it wasn't like from a petroleum. It was not a petroleum product. And they would wrap a sandwich or something into this natural beeswax wax paper, and we just need to bring that back. Like, I didn't die as a little kid because I had food wrapped in that sort of thing. So we just have to go back and think, what did our great grandparents do? Somehow they didn't have all these things and they still lived and they still ran their homes. So we just have to just think, okay, we don't have to have this, and it's hard. People won't let go. They just,
it's the price of the convenience, as you said, right?
it's not worth it. They've had these people, you might be doing it, that type of thing, where they said, I lived a year without plastic, and then how challenging it is. Like, we don't do it. We don't have much meat in my family in terms of what we buy. But when we would buy directly from the grass-fed beef rancher, that would be like in Wyoming. But guess what? Federal law mandates that if they ship grass-fed beef from Wyoming to my house, it has to be wrapped in plastic, sealed plastic. So you can't get it. You can't get it unless it's sealed in plastic. And you don't know how, it's supposed to be cold, so it's obviously not going to get heated, but it's like totally, completely, and touching it everywhere. And it's like, you sort of lose your appetite. It's like, I know that it's absorbed a lot of that phthalate. Now I don't want to eat it anymore. So, I guess that's good for keeping your weight down when you look at food and it's like, I can't eat it anymore. I know what's in it. Like, we talked earlier, you mentioned M&Ms. That was one of my favorite candies when I was a kid. And now that I know so much about it, it's like, it's lost its appeal, So that's one thing. It's like, when you see it, like I tell people, you see food through a different set of eyes than I see it, because I see it for what it is, kind of like, the wicked witch who pretends, puts on somehow, transforms herself and she looks like she's beautiful, but she's really the wicked witch or something. And I said, I still see her as the wicked witch, because I know what's in that food. And we have to remember that things that smell nice, they're really chemicals if they're not made from real plants, like real essential oils that put out the scents.
And it's funny because I remember being at a party and my son wanted to eat this cupcake that was all red and had a lot of M&Ms on top of it. And he came to me and he said, Mom, can I eat this? Because they always ask. And I said, well, this one has red 40. And my older son, has a huge issue with red 40, like in yellow, red and yellow. And it's like, give him an hour. You're going to see a different kid, totally transforming, meltdown, like not able to make cope. And, one of my friends comes to me and goes like, I know, are you serious? Give the kid a treat. And I'm thinking, what do you really believe to be a treat? Because this is not a treat to him. So what we believed, in the food industry, it's so crazy because people look at us like, oh my gosh, you guys use organic diapers? Really? But it's not just about being organic. It's what we believe. And as you said, once you know what's in there, we just can't go back of not knowing. Right?
But I know, it's like, once you see it, it's not a treat. A treat is a bowl of organic strawberries. And it's like I see it through the same different eyes like yours. And but mentioning diapers, I also recommend that my women patients buy organic tampons, and organic pads, just like that, because there's been some data on that. Of course, never enough because there's not that much research, but on the data that there is, that, these are toxics. They put all kinds of chemicals in, bleaches and things that to make things white. They're not naturally white. that bright white, and then everything gets absorbed. It's a very absorbent surface. So everybody should try to buy everything that's organic. It shouldn't be that things are sold that aren't organic.
Mm-hmm.
Once upon a time, all food was organic. It's so weird that anyone came up with this idea to put chemicals and pesticides and herbicides in food. I'm always like, who thought this was a good idea? It's like, to me, bizarre. So I always say farm to table, farm to table. You don't need a middleman putting weird things in your food. It's like, would you lick the floor? I mean, what are you thinking this is? I had to go to dictionary.com to look up what food was, because I kept seeing people eating things and it's like, is that food? So it's not. It is not food. To be food, it actually has to have nourishment. It has to be healthy. It has to be valuable to your body. And people are putting all kinds of things in their mouths. It doesn't make the definition of food. So I feel like you should have a disclaimer, a big sign on those products. This is not food. This is not suitable to be eaten. But would you like to buy it and eat it? But it should have a disclaimer saying not to be eaten. This is not food. Like, what is this? What are they selling? So, and all of these things are just like adding to the problems that are like coming, the products that you're using in the home, and then the products that you're eating. And that's why, like we talked about, everyone has a medical problem. It's just a question of exactly how is it manifesting and how long can you live with it? How resilient are you? So we really have to use every trick in the book to try to keep ourselves and our families healthy these days, and be honest about it, while at the same time not becoming too doom and gloom about it, because we do have fun and we do have treats. We have organic strawberries and similars.
Yeah. So it might be too much information for some of the guys out there that are listening to this. And my husband might be like, why are you saying this? But you were talking about something that is so important. Woman pads and tampons. I had for years, having my period was like the worst time of my life. I could not get out of the house. I was sore. I was like, basically my skin was coming off because of the contact with the tampon, with the pads. And it took me years until one friend told me about the cups. And that day, I just feel like I reclaimed my life again. And, using organic tampons and organic pads made a huge difference for me, like night and day. So It's so important. Even if you're not feeling the symptoms, as you're saying, it doesn't mean that's not affecting you. You're just not feeling it.
No, I mean, I have patients that come to me and they've been like going from doctor to doctor. They have chronic vaginal burning, pain, discharge, and they go from doctor to doctor. They've been on so many treatments, so many antibiotics and fungal treatments, but it's not better. Maybe it feels better for a couple of weeks and then it's right back. And then I check their vaginal microbiome and they have like no lactobacillus left. They've basically wiped out all of the normal microbial population of the vagina, and nowhere along the line did anyone say, by the way, what products are you using? And it turns out they're using some, really chemically toxic tampon, and nobody even said, stop using this. And there was a chemical reaction, more like an allergic reaction, kind of like what you were experiencing, a direct reaction to these chemicals in your tissues. And it may have set up this, sort of a scenario that some infectious agents sometimes would come in. So they'd have a superimposed infection on top of the inflammatory reaction. And they kept just killing with all of these antibiotics and antifungals until they wiped out the entire vaginal microbiome. And then, of course, it's still no good. And sometimes just changing, it's nurturing the microbes, nurturing instead of killing, and then using something natural like, organic products. Then, over time, there's usually something left. It maybe didn't show up on my test, but there's a few, like when they have it's down to extinction with just there's one couple, and then we breed them and suddenly there's thousands. So we have to take what there is, like our 2 good lactobacillus, and then breed them and nourish them and encourage them, and then women can regain their lives. People don't realize, like you said, what is it like when a woman has a day where there is no day that goes by that she doesn't have vaginal burning. It's like a terrible life, and they get often put in the, like, you need Prozac, like you have a psychiatric problem. This happens all the time to women. You have a psychiatric problem. Please.
Yeah.
We have gone through all of that, and obviously me on the sidelines, but yeah, I've seen what she's suffered through. So that's one of the biggest takeaways for me in all of this, is people like you that have a medical background, medical experience, all this medical training. And again, it's just like, we don't want people to say, oh, Western medicine is bad. It has its place, but if you're finding limitations, if you're not getting the answers, people like you are out there to kind of think outside the box and have protocols in place to finally get well and feel well and solve these problems, right? Instead of taking Prozac for something that's completely unrelated and just masking all of these symptoms.
That's like the go-to. I know.
Yeah, it's just so sad when you think about it. I mean, it really is sad.
And people even think about those things, like even like patients will ask for it, right? Like go to.
Well, that's all they know because they've been brainwashed, right?
Yeah, in Brazil, all my family, they know all the drugs for all kind of symptoms. When I say, oh, I have this, I have like 2 aunties that would call me, hey, take this drug, take that drug. Yeah. And I'm like, well, no.
Yeah, that's the pill to the ill philosophy, which I long ago left in the dirt, in the dust. Like, no, sometimes you do need something, for a critical need. And there are drugs that can be life-saving, but for chronic ongoing conditions, they're never curative. That's for sure. They're never curative. And even if you have to be on something like a blood pressure drug, there's always many, many other things that you can do. And, like they even know that, like people don't think about this, like lead, which is now, oh my gosh, it's in water supplies all over the world and all over the US, and lead causes hypertension. So if someone has unexplained high blood pressure, maybe you should test their lead level.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So then you talk about something I would love to ask you. What kind of test do you have for people that, okay, I come to you, let's say for fertility or some issues that you don't know exactly what I have. How do you start your treatment? Like what kind of tests do you do?
Well, I usually start with very basic tests first, which, basic to me, they're not that basic. Like I utilize a lot of labs from the Cleveland Heart Lab, which is now a division of Quest Laboratories. So it's covered by insurance in most cases. And I get inflammatory markers because I want to know the state of inflammation. It turns out that inflammation underlies almost all medical problems that occur in the body. Of course, then you have to figure out why is there inflammation, but I want to know what degree of inflammation is in this person. And then I get advanced lipid profiling and advanced thyroid testing because I want to know these foundational things. I like to get some nutritional tests. I want to know their omega-3 levels, of course, vitamin D. I want to know CoQ10, B12, sometimes like magnesium, zinc, copper. I can check all those different levels that really matter in terms of how the body functions. And then I like to look at the immune system in terms of, do they have positive anti-nuclear antibody, which the rheumatologists, they just poo-poo. They say, oh, a lot of people have a positive anti-nuclear antibody, an ANA. Well, that means that your body is making antibodies against your own nuclear material. I want to know that. And I want to know it long before a woman, for example, develops lupus so that she doesn't develop lupus. I want to be proactive. That was my whole mission in life, was to not just be reactive and deal with late end stage disease, which I can never truly fix. I can deal with it, but I can't really fix it and give the person the best life. I want to deal with things at an early stage. So I want to know if they have thyroid antibodies. I want to know if they have an anti-nuclear antibody and so forth. So I want to know their iron, for women especially, their iron status, their ferritin, So, and I sometimes get, but not always, sometimes I get a couple of genetic markers, like especially if they have family history of dementia, their ApoE and MTHFR, so look at their methylation capability. So those are sort of some of the basic ones. And of course, a chemistry panel and CBC, those types of things. And then depending on the situation, I may test things like their mycotoxins, their solvents, their phthalates, their BPA. There are companies I can get those things. In women, I want to look at their hormones, if they're reproductive years, and sometimes I'll get menstrual mapping test with ZRT lab so I can see what's happening through their whole cycle. You know, like, do they have a proper spike? You know, what's happening? Is their progesterone rising and falling properly? Because otherwise all I can do is get one moment in time. I want to see the whole cycle and what's happening, especially for my women with bad cramps or if they have infertility. So I want to know what's happening with their hormones and so forth. Those are a lot of the different things. And then sometimes I'll get a gut microbiome, I get vaginal microbiomes and that type of things. So I look, pretty extensively. I love data. So especially non-invasively obtained data. So I do like to do that. In my office, I have a vascular technician. She's wonderful. And so on people who are getting a little bit older, like 40 plus crowd, or sometimes even younger if they have like polycystic ovary syndrome and they already have prediabetes and so on. So I look at the carotid arteries to see if the intima lining is thickened. And women in the menopause, I like to look at their echocardiogram to see if their heart shows stiffness that they call diastolic dysfunction. That's a sign of low energy in the heart. And it's often ignored, but it's like really important. Women have very high rates that people don't realize of heart failure. We want to get on it early. So I do a lot of these advanced testing. If someone has metabolic dysfunction, I like to do a liver ultrasound to see if they have fatty liver, another silent epidemic in this world that we live in. And no yet pharmaceuticals are working on it, trying to come up with a drug for fatty liver. Some of the best things for fatty liver is time-restricted eating and fasting can really help. And of course, I will say like probably the universal best therapy is exercise. Like get off your chair, start moving. Fitness is a vital sign. So we actually have a gym in my office. So we do body compositions, we do fitness assessments. So fitness, it's like fallen off the radar of medical doctors that like, are you strong? Are you balanced? Are you flexible? Fitness matters. Fitness as you age is a bigger predictor of mortality than your blood pressure is. If you're frail and unfit, that's a very bad prognostic sign. So, we get involved in all of these things in my practice.
That's amazing. And it really confirms what we've been learning. It's this holistic approach. It's not just one thing. So one thing I have a question about, and I think this is going to be really valuable to the listeners experiencing what Fernanda's experienced and a lot of the people that we're meeting in our business, we're seeing when they go to the traditional doctor and they do the traditional tests and maybe a lot of tests, the levels that they're getting are quote unquote normal. Now, when you go to the the integrative and functional side of things, are there different markers of ill health that you guys have established or that have been established where those normal levels are actually not normal?
Well, I think you hit it on the head in terms of the levels that they call normal. When you look at a lab report, they don't call it a normal range. They don't. Not a single lab calls it a normal range. They call it a reference range. So a reference range means they took a couple of thousand random people who say they're okay, who knows, and then these are the values that they got on that random sampling of people. And the bottom number of the reference range represents the bottom 2.5 percentile, and the top number represents the top 97.5. So basically, you have 95%. So from the top number to the bottom number is 95% of all these random people tested, and the top and above the top number would be 2.5%, and below the bottom number would be the bottom 2.5%. So you would have to be in that 95%, you'd have to say that 95% of all random people are perfect. Well, we know that that's not true. And sometimes you look at the reference range. once you understand this is a reference range, this isn't a range of normals. So if you look at, for example, ferritin, so I do that a lot. That's the best marker for iron in a woman. Okay, and a man too, but I look at the women typically because so many women are iron deficient. So the ferritin reference range could be something like 9 to 300. Well, what kind of range is that? So a 10 is as good as a 299? Of course not. That's insane. So you have to know what's optimal. That's where, in functional medicine, we don't want to know just that you fit in the reference range. Are you at an optimal number? Like, for example, for ferritin, you'd want to be maybe around 100. You don't want to be at 10, or that's, even though you're in the reference range, you want to be like 100. Liver enzymes, we know the reference range can be different in different labs. If you don't know what the right optimal is, think about it this way. Liver enzymes. Liver enzymes, when they're high, they reflect liver inflammation. You don't want to have liver inflammation. So when you look at the reference range for liver enzymes, you would want to be in the bottom half. Okay, you don't want to be in the top. We don't want to be over the top, but you don't want to be at the very top, because that's already, you're getting into the 90-something percentile, and the 90-something percentile of people probably have an inflamed liver. So you don't want to be in the top. Now, thyroid, you don't want to be low thyroid. So if you have a reference range for thyroid, like T4, you don't want to be at the bottom. There, you want to be in the top half. So you have to think, do I want this or do I not want this? Even if you don't know, even if you go to a doctor and the doctor says you're in the reference range, or they don't even call it that, they say you're in the normal range. And remember, it's not normal range, it's just a reference range. Then you have to look at it, make sure you get the lab report and see what the reference range is. And then you think like B12. You want to have a lot of B12. So do you want to be in the bottom half of the reference range? Absolutely not, because for B12, you'd want to be over 500, but the reference range, usually the bottom is like around 250. That is ridiculously low. You don't want to be in the bottom of that B12 range. So that's where functional medicine shines. It's like understanding what the body needs, or what this really represents. If you don't know what the test is representing, then you're not going to be able to interpret it properly. So I think understanding what's optimal, what does the body do best with, then you can help really to interpret and use that data properly.
That is so true. When I was pregnant with my first kid, I wanted to have a natural delivery with no drugs, nothing. I'm very resilient to pain. I was not progressing. And the midwife comes in and she says, hey, by the way, you could have gestational diabetes, have developed gestational diabetes, because when you did the test, we were in the normal range, but it was basically like, I don't remember the number, but it was like 1 point below. So what the lab considered normal, they didn't flag the exam. So when she looked, she just overlooked, no flagging. She didn't look at any of the numbers.
I know, when you recognize what it really means, that it's just a reference range. And then you're 1 point below the very top of the reference range, which means that only 2.5% of people are above that, and that maybe you're too high, right? You don't want to have too high of a blood sugar, that's for sure. So yeah, these are really important things, because we do lab tests so that we can actually help people. Why are we doing these tests if it's not to really make a difference in somebody's life? So if they're interpreted incorrectly, you haven't really accomplished much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow, this is great. Thank you so much. Before we wrap up, I know we had talked about just briefly touching on a subject that one of our listeners asked about. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing and what you know about Lyme's disease and how that kind of plays into what we've been talking about?
Sure. Well, Lyme has a vector. It's a vector disease. So the tick. So ticks can carry Lyme, and ticks can be on many different types of animals. They've now shown that ticks can actually be infecting birds, like the beautiful songbirds that actually fly from like South America, Mexico, all the way up to the Arctic. And they have these migratory paths. And there's a whole group of migratory paths, one that goes on the East Coast in the central part of the US, like along the Mississippi, and then on the Pacific side. And these birds are actually now, many of them are infested with Lyme disease. So and then if they're around and a tick lands on them, and then the tick lands on you, so all of these interesting new vectors are coming into play. And then we have global warming, which is causing certain types of ticks that never used to be in certain areas to now be able to thrive, because it takes a really cold frost to kill off a tick. And some areas are not getting that really cold frost, at least not for long enough, and the ticks are surviving, and they're coming in by all these other vectors also. So we're having all these problems now with a silent, to some degree, because they're not always not reported, but there's a really growing epidemic and incidence of Lyme disease. Now, Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria, a type of a spirochete. So it's a type of a bacteria, and it can infect a person, and then they can develop the initial sign, which is what they call it, like a target rash, a bullseye. So it looks like a big circle with a dot in the middle. So it's like a big red target or bullseye. And that is sort of the classic. But some people, either they don't have it, they don't see it, and then their first symptom they didn't know they even got bitten by a tick. That's why if people go out in the woods, I mean, you have animals, you should check all your dogs, your pets that go outside for ticks every day. And the parents should check them for hidden ticks on their body when they're going outside, because people get these bites, and if you know about it right away, you can get tested, you can get treated, and that's the best. You want to be tested and treated right away. But sometimes nobody knows any of this is happening, and then the person comes down with weird, mysterious symptoms later. Most commonly, joint infections, it seems like it, or inflammations in the joint. It could even be just a single knee. It could be multiple joints. It can be a variety of different presentations, or strange rashes, or fatigue. So once you get chronic Lyme, it's really a sign, in my opinion, that you have an immune problem. Okay, so this is not always talked about, that someone who develops a chronic infection, it's an underlying immune problem. So this actually links back to endocrine disruptors and environmental toxins, because it turns out that estrogen, it's not well recognized, is really critical to having proper immune function. And when you have endocrine disruptors, these what we call xenoestrogens, these chemicals that interfere in males and females alike with the proper functioning of estrogen involving their immune cells, then you're going to have the more propensity to develop a chronic infection. So chronic Lyme, which can be devastating, there's even now chronic Lyme involving the brain, which can increase cognitive problems and even lead to dementia. So it's a serious thing having chronic Lyme. But the first thing you want to think about if you get something like a chronic Lyme is what's the state of the immune system, and look at endocrine disruptors, because there is no clear path for treating it. There is no 100% cure of any kind. But if we can bolster the immune system and activate our own inherent ability to heal, we can do tremendous good. So you really want to go to the extreme to try to reduce endocrine disruptors if you have chronic Lyme disease. And you want to work to really increase your oxidative ability, like we'd say, reduce oxidative stress, reduce inflammation. So the way you do that is by taking in a lot of antioxidants. So you want to eat lots and lots of vegetables, like 9 to 12 cups of vegetables a day, 3 cups of fruit. Take, appropriate targeted antioxidants. You want to do everything to reduce inflammation, to optimize your immune system, to get rid of endocrine disruptor exposures. And this will help dramatically for your recovery. So endocrine disruptors, environmental toxicants fit into this world of chronic Lyme disease.
Wow.
Wow.
It's just amazing because when we think about one thing like a plastic container, like you say, you go to a party, somebody says, oh, take this home, and then they put the hot food in there, put the top. We don't think about how down the line this will affect our life. Like if you do it once, you might, I just did it once, but we do that every day in a different way, in a different level. We're being exposed. And as you said, you're the first, you saw when plastic came about. back in our time, we didn't have as much exposure as we have today from everywhere, right? Growing up, as you're saying, food for us was organic. We used to go to the farmer's market every weekend, buy the food for the week. We never had any fast food in my hometown. It started, I don't know, 15 years ago. We didn't have fast food. Every single meal was cooked at home. So
right. That's what
that
people
was the organic way.
Right. So, I mean, this is becoming really a big deal. Like if you think of Lyme as a chronic, when it becomes chronic Lyme disease, that is like, you know, can be a global infection, certainly in the United States. And we're facing a time of potential epidemics, pandemics. And so having a healthy, robust immune system is more important than ever. So we have to think of what really is impacting on our immune health and our ability for our own cells, our own defense cells, to actually protect us from potential invaders, whether it's a spirochete that carries the Lyme disease, or or it's some other kind of virus or other bacteria. We need to have the healthiest, most functional immune systems possible. That means not having a body, what we call our toxic load, so high that we can't function properly, that our organs can't do their jobs properly, that the immune system is sluggish, and that it doesn't have that proper capability that we call phagocytosis, where it can gobble up, and that phagocytosis requires proper amounts of estrogen. And men have estrogen too. Men make it. They actually make it on site in different organs, and children. So really, when we talk about estrogen endocrine disruptors, it's affecting men and children as well as women. So I want to make that really clear. And the immune cells of men, women, and children all require estrogen to work properly. So getting endocrine disruptors into the body, like BPA and phthalates and all these others that can act as pseudoestrogens and actually interfere with the normal function of estrogen on the immune system, is going to make people more susceptible to developing these infections. So we need to be really on high alert that this isn't just trivial. It's not like inconvenient. This is something that we have to take to heart, that these are serious issues, and everyone that cares for themselves and a family member and so forth needs to try to look at their home. What are they using? What is happening and how can they reduce the toxic exposures and the toxic load that they and their family members are actually carrying?
Oh,
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
such a great statement. I couldn't agree more.
And we're living proof of it. We've lived through that, and now we meet people every day living through that. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes, thank you so much for all of the information you have shared, and with so much detail, and it made so much more clear for us even why those, how those plastic containers, how they affect our, our system and what they're doing to us. That was so clear. Thank you so much for explaining that. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So to finish it up, Dr. Felice is going to give the audience an ebook. It's actually a very, big ebook that is going to have a lot of information, and it's called Menopause SOS. And I'm going to let her describe a little bit what's in that ebook, and the link is going to be down below this video.
Well, menopause is a universal event for every single woman, and it's really a big hit to metabolic functioning of every woman, because estrogen, my favorite hormone, is gone. It's gone from the production of the ovary, and it really takes a heavy toll on every woman to some degree, and it may manifest differently. So my ebook gives you practical solutions, so how you can deal with menopause, so that what may be the second half of your life is really a wonderful time of life.
Oh, thank you so much. We appreciate your time with us and all the information you shared.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.